Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We're so glad that you're all here to talk about this very important issue of lack of opportunities for women in the workplace. I'm Mitali Bakshi, graduate student at New York University, studying towards my Master of Human Resources Management and Labor Relations. I'm also president of the Institute of Technology's Society of Human Resource Management student chapter. Our Human Resources Department offers opportunities to study critical issues of organizational effectiveness. I have here with me one of our professors from our Human Resources Department, Dr. Nowak, who recently published an article titled "Women Leaders Are Good for Business," which shed light on the lack of opportunities that women actually have in the workplace. I'm actually going to turn over to Dr. Nowak now to introduce himself.
Hi Mitali, hi everybody. My name is Radoslaw Nowak. I am an assistant professor of human resources management at New York Institute of Technology. He's one of my students, one of the best students, I must say. In our program, we basically teach our students how to become agents of change in corporations. It means we're trying to make sure they develop skills to identify critical organizational problems and then come up with action plans to address those key issues. One of the key issues for organizations is to make sure they can fully utilize their human capital, right? Potential of all employees. So when we hear about issues of discrimination or sexual harassment, it basically is a red flag for us as human resources professionals. It means that probably organizations do not fully tap into their talent.
Yes, definitely. I feel that if an organization has such bright talent that they've multiple locations, they would want to make sure that they can utilize everyone, because otherwise it's basically, like you said, a waste of your resources.
Absolutely. So the role of modern human resources management is to create an organizational system of practices that will enable firms to fully utilize human capital. And if we do not fully utilize qualified, highly qualified female employees, it means it is right. So we have in this discussion, so probably we should start with stating the key issue here. And the key issue here is, according to research, highly qualified female employee will not have as many advances as highly qualified male employee, right? So we should look at organizational studies from last 40 years to try to identify the key factors that could help us explain this key issue, right?
Yes.
Of course, this is not a simple issue, therefore there are no simple answers, right?
True.
Look at societal factors. Do you agree with me?
I do. I mean, change is difficult, and a change in terms of culture is more to do with society and perceptions of individuals. So you have to, it's a slow process overnight.
Absolutely. So when we teach our students about potential sources, we start with cross-cultural issues. So it basically means that in some societies, the role of gender is very strongly defined. We call it masculine societies. The distinction between the gender is not as strong, right?
Yes.
So what would be examples of such cultures? Do you know, Mitali? Like Denmark or Sweden, Scandinavian cultures, they are basically very equal in terms of opportunities for females.
Yes.
In some societies, the role of gender is very clearly defined. Why is it important for us? Well, because it creates normative pressure. Basically, it translates into how we raise boys and girls in those societies. In highly masculine societies, we basically send very strong signals to our boys and girls. These are roles that you can aspire. These are roles that you can aspire if you are a woman. These are roles that you can aspire to be if you are a man. So that translates into professional choices that boys and girls can make, right? So basically, at this point, we are talking about some aspirational level. in very masculine societies, we basically determine that the role of female is to stay at home, to take care of the family, etc. So females are not supposed to aspire to be leaders, to be managers, to be CEOs, right?
Yes.
Therefore, it is translated into choices that they will make. Why would it be important for us? Well, you actually have very international background. You're originally from India. You lived in Kuwait, right? And you went to undergraduate school in Atlanta. You lived in New York right now. What would be your understanding, perception of this issue?
Yeah, I think, like you said, the way children are raised in society these days, it makes a very big impact on how we identify towards a career path for ourselves. Things are changing, definitely, but I think there's a long way to go. There's a long road ahead. Growing up in Kuwait, for example, I've interacted with people from multiple countries, very diverse workplace as well, where I worked previously. And in terms of nationalities, if I look at it, people from different cultures, a lot of variety there. But still, there is that rampant, sense of gender inequality. There's always, you see women taking up leadership roles, but the percentage is still really small. In India as well, I haven't worked in the workforce in India, but I'm Indian. I've studied there. I understand the culture, and it is pretty much the same there. Bigger cities have a little bit of change coming up now, where you see, female leaders, female entrepreneurs as well, being published in magazines and business articles in the news. But on the level of masses, things are still pretty much the same. Every time a daughter is born in a family, there's a certain expectation, and every time there's a son born in a family, there's a different kind of celebration. So yes, definitely, I feel like things are headed towards change, but there's still more way to go.
How about your experience here in the United States?
Yeah, so we
sort of assume that here in the United States, the role of genders is
exactly. So when I moved over to Atlanta, I was here for a year, and I felt like it was going to be very different, and I was going to experience this culture where, suddenly there's so much of gender neutrality, and everybody is going to be, working, and I'm, as a female, looking to join the workforce, I'm going to have so many different women to look up to at senior leadership positions. Unfortunately, that was still not the case. There are many inspirational women that have taken up senior leadership roles, but the percentage still is very, very small, even in the US. Here in New York City as well, we go to many networking events, we go to conferences and seminars, and most of the times, you end up meeting more men who take up leadership roles. Women are working, there's a lot of women in the workforce, but women at the top leadership level, a female CEO introducing herself or an HR director that's female, is still not at the level where you would want it to be.
Absolutely. And so this is clearly manifested in the statistics that we can look up, right? For example, number of CEOs in the United States. Among the biggest corporations, this is around 5% or so.
Yes.
Female CEOs. So the number is really very, very small, right? So change in terms of cultural change, societal change, it's a very long and slow process, right? And we cannot really control it very effectively because it takes a village, actually, right, to make a difference. So everybody should work together in terms of redesigning educational system and providing more opportunities for girls in the future. But now we should perhaps move, and instead of looking at the societal level, we should look at the organizational level, firm, right? What's going on within a firm. And of course, a firm does not exist in a vacuum, right? So the firm is a manifestation of what's going on in a society as well.
Very true.
So to a large extent, we'll have the same structure or barriers within a firm that we see in societies, right? So when we talk about the decision-making process in organizations, there are very critical factors that we have to take into consideration. So it is, first of all, called social categorization, and I think you remember it from organizational behavior class. So what is social categorization about?
So it's basically about when you tend to show more affinity towards people that are similar to you, and you tend to isolate those that are different from you. So you assign positive characteristics and positive attributions to someone that's more like you, and just in general set negative attributions to someone that's different.
Absolutely. So that sets higher standard for females, because majority of CEOs, majority of top managers are still males, right? According to social categorization, those males will probably prefer to hang out with other guys, especially those who went to the same schools, have very similar background, they can talk about baseball, etc. And unfortunately, that results in specific decision making in terms of providing females with opportunities to develop in organizations, right?
Yes.
So the one key manifestation of this social categorization is number of mentors that are provided to females, right? So CEO who is a guy, there's higher likelihood probably he will like to mentor somebody who is
Similar
to him.
Definitely.
Right? And because we don't have many CEOs who are females, opportunities to be exposed to difficult projects that could develop your skills, opportunities to hang out with people who can pass knowledge on you and their experience as well are not as prominent, right, for females. So this is a key sort of structural obstacle for very many females, that they have to try harder in order to actually have same opportunities as males who are also qualified. Another critical factor within organizations that will impact how decision making in the organization is made is basically so-called role congruence.
Yes.
So what that practically means that in roles which we define as society as masculine, we basically will reject females who aspire to perform those jobs. And these are unfortunately leaders, these are unfortunately managers, including top managers, CEOs, etc. Or even in some industries like engineers. This is traditionally perceived as a feminine or masculine?
A masculine field.
Exactly.
I don't hear about too many female engineers.
So therefore, for women to be more successful in those roles, they actually have to continuously prove themselves. They have to do more in order to be noticed, in order to be provided with training opportunities, in order to be provided with resources, in order to learn some critical skills, develop some critical managerial skills, or basically they will be ignored.
Yes.
So therefore, the opportunities for female will be not as available as opportunities for males.
Definitely.
Right? So, as I said, when we have very clearly defined gender roles at the societal level, it will unfortunately be also reflected in a firm.
Yeah.
So if we have industries which are perceived as masculine, we can have a lot of decision-making processes that will discriminate against highly qualified female candidates, right? So
I think this also leads on to the fact that basically the concept when a male leader takes stance, and there are attributes that you assign to them, like we were talking in class. They're supposed to be strong, they're assertive, they're very they have a lot of different kinds of strong skills that we assign to them.
Yes.
And then when a female comes into the workplace and tries to actually associate and take on such kind of a role and also show assertiveness in the work field, more often than not they're criticized. It comes across, and unfortunately even female employees end up criticizing women leaders who are actually really strong and really powerful in the way they conduct themselves.
Yes, this is called backlash effect. It's a very powerful social mechanism again. So if we have clearly defined role of a leader as somebody who's dominant, masculine, assertive, and then a female comes in and she wants to build networks, collaborate, etc., to attain goals, she actually will be perceived as not qualified to be a strong leader.
Very true.
Because of our perception of what leader should be, right? Furthermore, if this female tries to show those characteristics, masculine characteristics, being powerful and dominant and strong, there's a backlash against them because they do not fit the role of what female should be. So again, that generates a lot of decision making that will actually discriminate against female employees, right? Excellent.
Yes.
So now we talk about sort of organizational problems.
Yes. Guys, we're talking about these issues, and we definitely want you to ask us questions. Leave us your questions in the comments section. I think we have a question here, if we can.
Sure,
yes.
absolutely.
So we have a question from Abhishek Sharma.
Vitaly, your eyes are younger if you can read it, please.
Sure. So there have been many discussions about the value of diversity, but what does diversity mean for employees, and what value does it bring to an organization?
It's an excellent question, right? Again, in our program, we talk diversity management, what diversity means for firms. Again, a modern firm should do everything, should set up a system in which every employee will be able to attain his or her potential, right?
Yes.
So we can completely utilize the critical human capital. Okay, unfortunately for many firms, diversity management means compliance, right, with governmental regulations. Because
meeting targets.
Mitali, there are very critical laws, right? From the 60s, the government said we cannot discriminate against minorities and females.
Yes, the Civil Rights Act, actually, 1964, it prohibited sexual harassment on the basis of two different standards that were established by the government, quid pro quo and hostile environment. So quid pro quo is basically exchanging of favors. So when an employer or a manager implies to his female associate or female employee to offer sexual favors in exchange for a promotion or an incremental bonus or an advancement in the career, that's basically quid pro quo. And then we talk about hostile environment, which is basically when the situation or the atmosphere in the environment or in the organization is such that women feel uncomfortable talking and making a point and sharing their opinion because the men around them make inappropriate jokes or comments of sexual nature. And that's, the government has been trying since the 60s to obviously prohibit these things, but
right, so it said, the government said, okay, from now on we cannot do it.
Yes, it's illegal.
We have to appreciate diversity. We have to make sure we hire minorities and women, etc. So we are 50 years later, and we have this outbreak of huge scandals, corporate scandals regarding sexual harassment. So how come it is possible, Mitali? So we have the government on one side saying, okay, you cannot do it, right? You can have serious problems if you do. So how come actually corporate culture still allows people to do that?
So Libby Sullivan asks, can the education system in the US begin to address these issues to eliminate the systematic imbalance of women in leadership roles? That's a great question.
That's a great question. What do you think, Mitali?
I think that, definitely there's much work to do, but of course, steps can be taken. If you want to shed some light on specific processes like we were talking about earlier,
absolutely. So the bias that we have, individual bias and group bias, it will be perpetuated unless there's some intervention, and we as a society will try to do something that will actually change the vicious circle. So the role of educational system here would be absolutely critical in terms of sending a very clear message to girls what sort of opportunities they could aspire to in the future, right? So make sure that they are raised in a way that actually they could become very successful leaders, successful managers, and that they will accept this role not only as role of males but also as role of females in a society. I hope I answered the question.
Yes.
Okay.
We have another question. Karen Marie asks, what do you think when you see an organization is dominated by either men or women? How does that happen? And if it happens naturally, why is it a problem?
Okay, so first of all, again, we should start with governmental regulations, right? So the government said in 1964 that you cannot discriminate,
Yes.
right? And we have two standards of discrimination.
Yes.
Do you remember, Mitali, from employment
Yes.
law? So what are those standards?
The quid pro quo and hostile
No, I mean
environment.
disparate impact and...
Oh, disparate impact and disparate treatment. Yes,
Yes,
of
so
course. The intentional and the unintentional
discrimination.
discrimination. Yes.
Yeah, so what is unintentional discrimination
Yes.
about? It's statistical
Discrimination.
So how can we establish it?
Basically, when an organization doesn't intend to discriminate, but it so happens that they do because of either their hiring process, the people that they interview, the people that they grow in the organization develop, some of the policies that are put into place which just automatically
So how can we establish
assume.
that actually a firm discriminates? Well, let's say we have 50 highly qualified females and 50 highly qualified males applying for the same job. And then it turns out when we look at who we hired, that we hired 48
Yes.
males and 2 females.
Exactly.
So when we have this kind of statistical analysis, we can basically claim that there is statistical discrimination. Okay, but
We have another question.
but I didn't really answer the question that Karen Marie posted. It was a question about what happens when we have an environment dominated by males.
Yes.
Okay.
How can we?
So,
Yeah.
as I said, because of our social consensus that certain roles are roles of males, okay, it actually defines the hiring practices in many industries. For example, Silicon Valley, startups, technology development, we know that these companies are dominated by males. Why? Because we traditionally accepted that engineers should be males, right? So there are fewer women applying for those jobs, okay? And then when they are applying and they are trying to do their best, they could be discriminated because, again, they have to prove themselves more than males. It means basically if they are not showing enough masculine traits, they could be classified as very weak. So that will affect, let's say, whether they are promoted or not. We have the situation in industries which are categorized as female-oriented industries. Unfortunately, you know, these are very important jobs, like preschool teachers, right? Like nurses. Unfortunately, those jobs pay much less.
Yes.
Right? So we could have some assumptions about gender role, and those could be feminine gender roles. However, in those jobs, the competition for those jobs might be much lower because they are not perceived as important and well-paying as those jobs dominated by males. Right? Okay.
Thank you. So we have another question from Kara Xu. She asks, how can companies support all their employees in a way that isn't too expensive and leads to better outcomes for the firm?
Okay, so I guess what we should say that the company basically should create processes,
Yes.
practices, reward highly qualified employees.
Yes.
So the key role for HR is to make sure that when we make decisions regarding hiring, promotion, etc., we actually reward candidates who are most qualified for a job.
Definitely.
So we could not really focus on such factors as gender, race, etc., right?
Yes, and I think this question also kind of goes over onto, you know, how companies provide training opportunities for their employees, but sometimes you notice it all the time, actually, not just sometimes, that the male employees are actually sent for training, and female employees may not be given as many opportunities for learning or growth and career progressment. Well, it's just because I think what has ended up happening is there's always a stereotype that's put into place that men can just work on multiple kinds of projects. If there's travels involved, if there's going to an odd location, a new client, a man can just go in and work more comfortably than a female can. So let's just invest after developing him rather than her, where she's more limited in her work, which isn't really the case, but that's the perception.
Yes, exactly. We have multiple studies showing, for example, that an average male manager will get more resources than an average female manager, right? So that translates into outcomes, it translates into opportunities to develop skills, develop your abilities, etc. and therefore it limits opportunities for female employees.
Sure.
Another question?
Yes. So your article says that women face disadvantages in getting the kinds of opportunities that would help them advance into leadership positions. Is it fair to say that sexual harassment is one of the factors that hold women back?
Okay, that's a
I
difficult
think so.
question, very interesting. You think
Yes,
so?
I think so, because, women walking into a workplace, if they're not feeling comfortable, if they're not feeling safe, if they're being harassed, if they're not, able to perform to their best, then that is going to lead to lack of opportunities for them, because automatically they're just not going to be the star of the show, or the qualified professionals, or they're not going to stand out in a team. The men who are just much more comfortable in their skin, being in that meeting room, for example, which is, I don't know, a situation of 5 men and 1 female, and she's just not comfortable in that atmosphere to give her opinions.
Absolutely, excellent answer, Mitali. So it speaks again to some structural distribution of power within the organization. If we have only male CEOs in top management, primarily males, etc., this is going to create different dynamics and can actually result in sexual harassment issues, as we saw in big corporations like Fox News a couple of years ago, or small corporations like startups in Silicon Valley, right?
Yes,
when
definitely.
last year we saw CEOs actually being engaged in inappropriate behaviors.
Yes.
Samantha.
Yes.
Yeah?
Samantha asks, what is something that women can do to show their leadership skills without being perceived as unqualified or not ready for the leadership role?
Okay, excellent question. So again, the role of HR management is to develop clear process, right? And the outcome of the process would be to select, to promote the most qualified candidate.
Yes.
So it basically means that if there is, let's say, a situation of sexual harassment in a workplace, it is obviously illegal. If there's a situation of discrimination, it could be obviously illegal, right?
Sure.
What we can do as individuals is we can focus on developing our talent, right? So your position in the organization will depend on how much you know, so your knowledge, what sort of skills you have, what sort of abilities you demonstrate. So I would really recommend for everybody, especially for female employees, try to invest into their development as much as they can. Yeah.
Continued education, as they call it.
Yes, absolutely.
We have another question from Karen Marie. Has it been proven that organizations with female leaders have lower rates of sexual harassment?
Actually, harassment issue is very often linked to structural distribution of power. So in organizations, when we have position of top management basically occupied by males, it creates different cultural norm of behavior. So that can translate into into situations when male managers think it is not appropriate, but it is accepted actually to try to engage in inappropriate behaviors with their female employees. And unfortunately, because of lack of female leaders in position of power, female employees who are trying to advance, they can sort of develop an understanding that actually they have to comply with certain norms of behavior which are not appropriate, and that is not right.
That's not
it's
right.
illegal as well.
Exactly.
But unfortunately, this is what happens.
It's still happening.
Yes.
We have a question from Ryan, who is asking, who is HR trying to protect, the employees or the CEO and its shareholders?
Oh, wow, that's an excellent question, right?
That is.
So first of all, HR is a business function, right?
Yes.
Business function, it means the objective of the function is to make organizational system as effective as possible, right? Increase organizational effectiveness. And if we have organization in which people do not feel comfortable, they feel they are discriminated against, or they do not have the same opportunities as other employees, we can assume that probably they will not perform as well as they could.
They could, yes.
So in sense, the role of HR is to work for employees by creating a system with clear processes, with very clearly defined criteria for promotion, for selection, etc., because it diminishes individual bias of people in a position of power.
Yes, and you know, your employees, shareholders, they're all stakeholders in an organization. We talk about internal and external stakeholders all the time. Anything that you put into place, any policy or any steps that you take to improve things in an organization, you want to make sure that it positively impacts both your internal and your external stakeholders. So a CEO is a CEO of an organization, but he's also an employee of the organization. If it's a female CEO, do you not want HR to protect her too? So it covers everybody, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Libby Sullivan, another question. How do women become empowered at work? What does a company have to do to make that possible?
Excellent, right? That's a very, very difficult question.
Well,
so again, I think the power of our, as individual employees, will link to how much we know, right? The scope of our skills, abilities, etc., right? So on one hand, we should try to develop those because this is going to increase our bargaining position within the organization.
Sure.
On the other hand, we know that if we have very few female executives in a company, mentoring opportunities for female employees will be lower, right? So I think it is responsibility for female employees as well try to help.
Definitely. I mean, you know, you have to start training people, you have to give them learning opportunities, give them coaching, mentoring, and if a female employee takes it upon herself to mentor her subordinates, that's how you're going to grow, you know. We as women have to make that first move, I guess.
Absolutely. So we do not expect the change will be very fast, radical, etc. But step by step, I think we can build organizations in which opportunities for women will be more available, right?
That's true.
And that would be ultimate success.
Yes. All right. So we're still, you know, talking about this critical issue. Obviously, these are not things that are going to be just spoken about a few times and then that's it. It's an ongoing change, like we said. It's an ongoing process.
So what is the role of HR, do you think, Nitali?
What is the role of HR? So there's a lot of things that HR can actually do. I mean, like we spoke about this, right? So there are company policies put into place. Anytime you take up employment in a new organization, you get your employee handbook. There's harassment policies that are put into place. Every company and the HR department in the company has to make sure that the policy is set in such a way that it actually will protect employees and their rights and not, you know.
Okay, so what we have the government saying, okay, we cannot do it, we cannot discriminate. We have employee handbook, right, saying we have zero tolerance policy, but we still have behaviors that would indicate otherwise. So what is,
I think,
who is responsible for it? I mean, is it a failure of HR if we actually have this kind of discrimination still going on?
Definitely is. I mean, you know, we call HR human resources. If we can't take care of our own people, then there's something that we're definitely not doing correctly out there. I think it's very important for HR to understand the level and the extent to which this thing has actually, you know, these issues have actually grown and the negative impact that they have on business. So at the end of the day, HR has to take more keen interest. It is
proactive role, right?
A very proactive role. They have to be more dynamic to these changes happening all the time and, you know, learn to adapt and keep bringing in policies, give employees training, coaching, mentoring them the right way, doing, I don't know, some sort of maybe group activities to foster better kind of working together.
Organization will be the most successful if employees feel that they have same opportunities like everybody else, right?
Yes.
If they basically feel that some employees like males are provided more opportunities than females, it will definitely impact how their engagement, their involvement, right, as well as their perception of organizational justice. So, if we didn't get any additional questions,
if we weren't able to answer all your questions, please do still leave them in the comments section. Be sure to, you know, like this video, share it, send more comments in. We will be sure to reach out to you and respond. But For now, thank you so much for joining us. And for any more information, please visit our website and go on to nyit.edu/management for the NYIT School of Management website. Thank you once again for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Nowak, for this insightful discussion.